Welcome friends, welcome colleagues, welcome people in India where we are almost at 7 p.m. Welcome people in the US at the central time where it's almost 7:30 a.m. from where Professor Subhash Kak has joined all the way from Oklahoma State University area in Oklahoma. I've been in touch with Professor Kak for 2 decades now, almost I think more than 2 decades, and really my privilege to have him for this India Studies webinar series that we've been running at Flame University for now almost 2 years. This is the 16th such lecture, such webinar, and extremely delighted and privileged to welcome such an esteemed guest, esteemed scholar who has written in so many fields. So without further ado, I will start reading his profile from his Wikipedia page. So Professor Kak is an Indian-American computer scientist and historical revisionist is what they say, but he's the Regents Professor of Computer Science Department at Oklahoma State University, Stillwater, an honorary visiting professor of engineering at JNU in New Delhi, and a member of the Indian Prime Minister's Science, Technology, and Innovation Advisory Council. He has published in the history of science, philosophy of science, ancient astronomy, history of mathematics, and on and on. Archaeoastronomy, and he has written about indigenous Aryans. And most importantly, in 2019, Indian government awarded him the Padma Shri, the 4th highest civilian award in India, for his contributions on the history of mathematics, science, ancient astronomy, and philosophy of science. His page is a long one with many, many books. That some of the books I've also read. That is especially the one that he wrote with George Feuerstein and David Frawley, and that's some of the most path-breaking books that we have in the field of Indian history, Indian civilization. So Professor Kak, most welcome again, and floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Jain. Delighted to be a part of your seminar series. Since you started with Wikipedia, it's also called Trashpedia, because Wikipedia is a place where there is this big struggle between those who have controlled the discourse of Indian history and those who are trying to challenge it. And therefore, I'm sorry to say, Wikipedia is not a reliable source. It's not used as a reliable source in any American university.
Right.
But let's go beyond that.
Yes.
To answer the question, why is it that we are talking about history of science in ancient India? The quick answer will be obtained if you step down into a Delhi metro station. The moment you arrive at the station, you'll see that the names of the various lines in Hindi are given names such as blue, magenta, yellow, green, and so on, as if Hindi does not have any names for colors. And perhaps inspired by the Taittiriya Upanishad notion, Atithi Devo Bhava, the Indian mind works in this particular way, where maybe an American or an Englishman is going to arrive in Delhi and use the Indian metro, Delhi metro, and he or she would have difficulty in navigating names which are derived from Sanskrit or from the current languages of the region, and therefore we should be using Western names or English names for colors. In fact, one can even imagine that 400 years from now, when historians, if there is a big catastrophe in this world, and historians try to determine as to what had happened in India 400 years prior, they would conclude that Indian languages did not have names for colors, and possibly the heat and dust of the Indian plains made Indians look at things only in black and white. And this is the history also of Indian sciences. After 1947, a strange dark curtain descended on narratives on Indian science, because if you look at the decades prior to 1947, if you look at, for example, Brajendranath Seal's history of the positive sciences amongst the Hindus or in India, 1910s or 1920s, or if you look at a popular book such as the famous series by Will and Ariel Durant, History of Civilization, the accounts of Indian ancient history are very reasonable, and they are quite consistent with what was known until then. But after 1947, it was somehow decided, just as it was decided that Sanskrit or Hindi names should not be used for colors in Delhi Metro and other metros, it was decided that the history of India's own sciences should be kept out of school textbooks and college books. Perhaps that's going to hurt this strange notion of how we were going to build a modern state. So I've written a lot on this, and in fact, the challenge to this bizarre way of looking at India's own past has occurred at many places, and a lot of Western scholars have contributed to it, and so have a lot of Indian scholars. And hopefully now things are in the process of changing. In fact, just last night here, but morning in India, there was a conference organized by CSIR on the dissemination and communication of traditional Indian knowledge. So all of this is being lumped into traditional Indian knowledge because no such dichotomy occurs in any other civilization. If knowledge is useful, it is universal. If what is within India's tradition is of relevance to the entire world, it should be a part of the mainstream package and not put in a silo. But at least putting it in a silo is an important first step, because we are still afraid of sort of standing up and saying things as they are. In fact, just this morning, I saw on Twitter that HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, has taken off the symbol of Hanuman from the tail of the planes that it builds, even though Indonesia continues to use the symbol of Garuda, the Vahan of Vishnu, as the name of its airline and in its own pages, because I think in India the contest for who speaks for Indian civilization and culture is a very big one. And after 1947, the control was ceded to people who wanted to continue to see India through the lens of the colonizer. And of course, that's been a very tragic mistake. And I think we have lost a few decades, but hopefully things are going to be turned around. So I'm just going to be talking about a few things, and I've written essays on it, and you can Google it, and they're all in peer-reviewed journals in the West and elsewhere. And two of the titles that you can come to, one is called Indian Foundations of Modern Science, and another is called a brief history of ancient Indian science, and many others, hundreds of peer-reviewed articles that you can come and look at the evidence and write on it and challenge people and challenge me as well, because that's what the whole process of knowledge creation is about. So I just want to talk about a few things that Indians are not aware of. The beginning of scientific revolution is traced to the 17th century to the invention of calculus and infinite series, which made it possible to make or create new ways of analysis, which led to the flowering of physics and ultimately of other fields. So it's traced to Newton and Leibniz and so on. But in the last 60, 70, or 80 years, in fact, prior to 1947 itself, but further research has been done in the recent decades, it's come to light that in Kerala, a very robust tradition of scholarship existed, which is now called the Kerala School of Mathematics and Astronomy, where infinite series were developed 200 or 300 years prior to their development in Europe. And now there are some historians who have suggested that the Jesuits who were in Kerala prior to the scientific revolution, one of the things that the Jesuits were doing were to gather knowledge wherever they could and take them to Rome, to the libraries there. So one theory that's being pushed around, although there is no hard evidence at this point, because the libraries in the Vatican are not accessible. All the material in that is not accessible to everybody. So the theory is that the Jesuits took some of this knowledge back to Europe, and that contributed to the development of infinite series and calculus, and also astronomy, because this Kerala School of Astronomy and Mathematics was also very advanced, far more advanced than European astronomy at that time. And that could have had a significant influence on the rise of modern astronomy. So this is one thread, the scientific revolution itself. Another thread is computers. We live in the age of computers. It's changing everything. And what computers consist of is, first of all, the program. And the program has certain rules and rules about rules, because that's how programming is done. And then the second part of it is, of course, digital systems, which consists of combinations, perhaps now using integrated circuits of millions of logical gates. And so the program works on the data and finally produces the result, which is printed or presented to the person who's running the program. So both these aspects, namely rules about rules, as well as gates, mathematical logical gates, have their source in India. Rules about rules. You go back to Pāṇini's Ashtadhyayi, about 500 BCE, and this is, of course, standard knowledge of linguistics. Everybody accepts it. Pāṇini is considered by some Western famous scholars as perhaps the greatest genius who ever lived in any field, because he created this system of 4,000 rules, including rules about rules, which describe all possible sentences in Sanskrit. Now, this is also a model of an abstract computing machine. It should be able to generate all kind of data. In fact, a machine which is able to generate linguistic data of this kind is as powerful as any computing machine. So this is one aspect, the programming aspect. So Ashtadhyayi can be viewed from that perspective. The second is mathematical logic. Now, it's normally seen, if you have done engineering or computer science, it's traced back to about 1850s. There were three English mathematicians, and their names are Charles Babbage, Augustus de Morgan, and George Boole. And they created mathematical logic. They created a calculus for reasoning. And in fact, you have De Morgan's theorems in logic, or you have Boolean algebra. They are part of computer science. And so they, in the 19th century, of course, this field grew slowly, but then the revolution that took place was in 20th century. Now, in the 1890s, George Boole's widow, Mary Boole, who was a well-known science writer, wrote a very famous essay where she said that, look, credit to India has not been given in the invention of mathematical logic, because these three people were mentored by a fellow called George Everest, after whom Mount Everest is named in the English language. Of course, it's, as we know, it's called Sagarmatha in Nepali. George Everest had been the Surveyor General of India for a long time, and I believe his he died in Missouri, if I am not mistaken. So he used to go to England from time to time during the summers. And according to Mary Boole, George Everest told these three people that, look, I've learned this amazing stuff about reasoning in India, and it's called Navya Nyaya. Navya Nyaya arose in Bengal and Bihar about 800 CE and thereafter. And modern scholars have now, of course, established that Navya Nyaya is exactly equivalent to mathematical logic. And therefore, now we do, of course, have a causal chain through the agency of George Everest, teaching Babbage and De Morgan and Boole about what he had learned in India, which ultimately led to the creation of logical gates, which are used in integrated circuits and which have transformed the world as we know it. A third field, which is somewhat not direct in the sense of that this had already been done, because certainly programming in the concept of rules and rules about rules is a part of the amazing structure of Ashtadhyayi. And we know about Navya Nyaya and its theorems, which are equivalent to mathematical logic. But the other field that we should all know about, and sadly Indians don't know about, is the whole framework of modern science. The whole framework of modern physical and related sciences is rests on the shoulders of quantum mechanics. And without quantum mechanics, you cannot explain chemistry. You cannot explain physics. You can't explain atomic physics. Without that, you can't explain chemistry. Without explaining chemistry, you can't explain biology. Without explaining biology, you cannot explain brain science. Okay. Now, quantum mechanics creator was a fellow called Erwin Schrodinger, an Austrian Vedantin. His life story is most fascinating. He used to carry the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita with him wherever he went. And in his autobiography, which he wrote in the 1960s, he claims that in the 1920s, when there was a huge crisis in physics, because physicists could not explain why the electrons moving in orbits around the nucleus of the atom. Electrons, as we know, are negatively charged and the nucleus is positively charged. Why don't the electrons fall into the nucleus? So what is the source or the solution to the mystery of the stability of the atom? And so this was the big crisis, and they had no answer to it. And then Schrodinger, in his autobiography, claims that the idea came to him from the Upanishadic Mahavakya, Ayam Atma Brahman, or this Atman is equivalent to the entire Brahman, which gave him this idea that the quantum state, or the state in its most subtle form, should be a superposition of all possibilities. In fact, this is the very heart of quantum mechanics. I do quantum mechanics research myself. There are two ideas in quantum mechanics. One is reality as it is a superposition of all possibilities. And the second is that when you interact with the reality, you have access to only one of them. And this is called the collapse idea of quantum mechanics. And according to historians of quantum mechanics, the way it has evolved since the 1920s and 1930s is perfectly consistent with the framework of Vedanta, which is the reason why Vedanta is so much in vogue in scientific circles in the West. Not so in India, because Indians do not know any of this. They do not know the history. And in fact, most fascinatingly, a few years ago, I had been invited to give a talk at what is called Kumbh Mahayagya at Ujjain. So what they had done was invited a lot of professors from across the world to talk about their subjects. And they had set up this huge tent, about 20,000 people near Ujjain. And I gave a talk on Indian science. And at the end of this talk, an Indian professor, Indian physics professor, came up to me. He says, "Professor Kak, what is this? This is terrible. This could not be true. Why are you even saying this? You are misleading people." This is the tragedy of modern India, because this is stuff that you can all confirm, and you should check it, all this for yourself. Now, there is another aspect to it, and that aspect is related to the significance of continuing significance of Indian science for modernity, because one could also make the case that, okay, Indians were pretty good because India was the richest country in the world. India's share of the world economy until 1000 was 45%, and even after the wars for 600-700 years, it was still about 20 to 25% in 1800 when the English came. And in the 1 century of absolute rule by India, when India's economy was destroyed through taxation, the policy of taxation and tariffs that was instituted by the British, and also by not allowing India to develop its own industries after the Industrial Revolution took place in Europe in 1820s. So Indian products were then at a disadvantage. So India became totally deindustrialized. There was famines, which have been called a late Victorian Holocaust. People have estimated maybe 30 to 40, 50 million Indians died in these famines. And Indian share of the world economy collapsed from about 20% to as little as 1.8% at the time of the First World War. After that, the British did allow for some industry to come up in India, and it had risen to maybe 2 or 2.5% by the time they left. And even now, after when India is the third largest economy on a per purchasing power parity basis, PPP basis, and fifth in nominal dollar terms, India's share of the world economy has probably not even climbed to 5 or 6%. So you can imagine, India was the world's biggest economy for all these centuries. And that is also because India was, prosperous, it was organized, it was peaceful, and it had the most advanced sciences, as was acknowledged by everybody, including Sayyid al-Andalusi from Andalusia, which is Moorish Spain, writing in 1065 in his book reviewing the sciences of all the nations. And he did claim, and this is far from India, an Arab, Spanish Arab, claiming that India is the foremost nation in the sciences. Okay, so this I was talking about quantum mechanics itself. Now, the second aspect of quantum mechanics, in the quantum mechanics created a revolution because physics until then, if you look at Newtonian physics, was all mechanical. The whole universe was a kind of a machine, but quantum mechanics sort of broke that paradigm and brought in the observer. And it's the interaction of the observer and the observed which makes the superposition of the state function collapse. Now, if you take this idea of observer further, then the question arises, well, how does the observer observe? So does this bring us to the question of consciousness? And consciousness is the frontier of modern science. And I've been a part of discussions in the West at the highest levels. In fact, 5-6 years ago, at the highest level in Washington, it was decided to answer the question whether computers of the future, not necessarily 10 years from now or 20 years from now, maybe 50 years from now or 500 years from now, will become conscious. And we had many week-long discussions of this. And two large conclusions arose. One, and of course, the panels were divided. They were not a uniform opinion. And these were the world's leading physicists, neuroscientists, mathematicians, computer scientists, and some philosophers. And some people thought that computers will become conscious, people who are generally from computer science field, who do not know physics and philosophy as much, but many others who know about quantum mechanics and also the whole history of ideas thought that computers will never become conscious. But everybody agreed that even if computers don't become conscious, computers will dominate the world, because computers will replace human beings literally at all stuff that we do, including what people like you and I, who are in the education field, what we do, because using technology, just as the technology that's being used at this particular moment for me to communicate with you guys, using technology, you can reduce the cost of education. Perhaps we don't need to have so many brick and mortar universities. Perhaps with studios in Pune, at Flame, or wherever, this knowledge by professors can be communicated all across the world. In fact, according to the dean, one of the deans of Harvard Education School, in US itself, in the next few years, next couple of decades, half the colleges and universities will go bankrupt because of the pressure of technology, because the pressure of online learning, where the costs are so much lower. And as we know, the costs of education in a private school, in an elite school in the US, have risen to almost as high as $100,000 a year, which is about 80 lakhs a year. And for most people in the United States itself, if you have done your degree in the humanities, let's say history of art or philosophy and so on, there are no jobs that will be able to make or help you pay back this loan. In fact, there is this idea that one reason this crazy woke ideology has risen in the US is because all these young people with degrees in the social sciences, where there are no jobs, because in America you also have the system that there's no retirement age for professors. So in my university, we have professors as old as 90s who are still teaching courses. So old professors are still where they are. There are no openings for young people, and these young people are so mad that they want to bring the entire system down. But in any event, the question of what is consciousness is central to reality. And this is the very heart of ancient Indian science. What are the Vedas, for example? If you leave out the stories and the hymns and so on, the very heart of the Vedas, if you were to ask me in one line, is that reality has two aspects. One is the physical reality, which according to Mundak Upanishad, for example, or according to the Vedic tradition, is apara vidya, which means the lower sciences, which means sciences which are amenable to being represented in terms of language. Whatever can be described by language is called apara vidya. And the other is Paravidya, which is the science of consciousness. But consciousness is one. Consciousness is through which we relate or understand the universe. In fact, the whole universe resides within our consciousness, right? So consciousness, according to the Vedas, is primary, and that's called Paravidya. So in one sentence, what consciousness science is the complementary aspects of physical reality. And so this is where the narratives of the Upanishads or the various Shastras, the various sciences that we have, the darshanas, are all about. They are sometimes in coded language, or Tantra, for example, a coded language, the science of consciousness. And therefore, of course, one could ask the question, well, if computers, the silicon machine, cannot be conscious, and the neuron machine of the brain is conscious. But the question, and it's a valid question to ask, and this is also one of the questions that came up in our discussions in Cambridge. One of our week-long meetings was in Cambridge, UK, and in the US was, well, can we also create machines which are still conscious, but where we have control over them? And the answer to that is, of course, not easily given, because, but one might speculate that such machines will also be living machines, because the hallmark of consciousness is adaptation. Computer memories are fixed. Human memories change. In fact, the very idea of consciousness is given a name in Indian thought, in, let's call the Sanatan river, and it's called Shiva. Shiva is the axis around which all the memories reside. If you were to view a hurricane, the eye of the hurricane is constant, it's fixed, while the waves, the waves around it, the storm, the winds are going at faster and faster speeds. Human awareness or mind is similar. Our memories fade, and each time we recount a memory, it changes. Our memories of our childhood go away, and even memories of recent events fade. But what holds all this together in our hearts, I'm not using the word mind here, and I'll explain to you why, is consciousness. It's that axis, and that's why Shiva is represented as an axis. And in fact, there's a very, very interesting story of what's the length of this axis. This is the skambha, and this axis is infinite. But not going back to that story, consciousness is always a way beyond your description. And even in Tantra, and Tantra is the inner cosmos, you have the outer cosmos mirrored in the inner cosmos, because we conceive of all that is outside within our inner consciousness, within our consciousness. So the pictures of this inner cosmos, as in Sri Chakra, if those of you have seen these tantric mandalas or images, and Sri Chakra is the architecture of the mind, if you will. Shiva is just an infinitesimal dot within, because all your conversations with yourself, so to speak, are with embodiments within yourself, and which is why you have the notion that you can understand reality only by having this conversation with Prakriti. Prakriti is your own nature. Prakriti is also the goddess, which is where you come to conceptions such as, or understanding of why Adi Shankaracharya, who spoke of, Shivoham, I'm Shiva, Shiva meaning this self, this axis within yourself. Every human being, every living being is Shiva in that sense, although our capacity to interact with the reality is modulated by the capacity of our mind, which does vary from individual, from species to species, and certainly other species cannot do calculus, for example, which we human beings can do. And so Shankaracharya himself also wrote Saundarya Lahari, where he speaks of the goddess, because goddess represents reality, embodied reality. Goddess is our nature, and goddess, as the Vedas say, the nature, Prakriti, as the Vedas say, is governed by laws. There are laws determining how the universe unfolds. So Indian sciences are all about unfoldment by law. But then, of course, you could very well ask, if everything is by law, so then where does the divinity come in? Where does freedom come in? And this is also a contemporary concern. Modern scientists are asking where, everything in physics itself, even in quantum mechanics, the unfoldment is by a deterministic process. And so the question is, since we are also systems, then how do we have freedom to interact with the system? And as a response to this, people are coming up with all kinds of theories, which I believe are rather limiting and certainly not revealing of the deeper sense. In fact, books have been written recently that that we are only zombies. Our idea that we are free is just an image that arises in our mind after decisions are taken. And to a certain extent, that's true, because modern neuroscience has shown that there is a 200 millisecond gap between your sense of having taken an independent decision and the moment in which the potentials rise in the corresponding centers in your brain. To explain this a little bit, there was a professor who's now dead. His name is Libet, Benjamin Libet. He carried out this very famous experiment where patients undergoing neurosurgery, who are awake, by the way, because there are no pain cells inside the brain after the skull has been, incision has been made, and the neurosurgeon can now explore the places in the brain where perhaps there is a tumor or something which needs to be taken out. So the neurosurgeon has a conversation with the patient. The patient is awake and says, okay, what's your response to this? What's your response to that? So in the connection with such surgery, the patient was asked to press a button with his index finger, and the whole body is mirrored in the motor cortex, and there's a certain area in the motor cortex corresponding to the finger. So the patient was asked to do it freely, or free will, at different moments. So you can account for the time that the neural waves will take to travel from the tip of the finger, or the opposite way, from the motor cortex region corresponding to the finger to the tip of the finger. When that was subtracted out, it was discovered the potential started rising in that area 200 milliseconds prior. So that what we think you are being free is already accounted for through the whole sequence of interactions that exist, and of course corresponding together with some random forces that keep on occurring around us, which impact us or impinge on us. And therefore, this does challenge the whole idea of free will. And that's the reason why some people are saying that we are only zombies. We think that we have free will, but there's no free will. Now, this is a question which was also asked in, in quantum mechanics also. And in fact, my good friend, who's now deceased 3 or 4 years ago, the very famous Malayali physicist George Sudarshan wrote a paper on it in the 1970s called the quantum Xeno effect, where he showed that if you have a quantum state, by observation alone you can control it, which means that this is how consciousness, if it's apart from the physical universe, how does it control the physical universe? What is the role for consciousness? If consciousness is not a product of the physical body, which is of course also something which is the heart of the Brahma Sutras. Brahma Sutras, the text behind the Vedanta, the Brahma Sutras, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita. The Brahma Sutras are all about showing why the Atman cannot be a part of the Sharir, of the body. Likewise, consciousness cannot be a part of the physical system. What George Sudarshan showed, well, if it's not a part of the physical system, then how are we conscious? Then so consciousness has got to be transcendent. It's not in time and space. That's why consciousness is one. That's why Shiva is one. We are all the same. This is what Vedanta is, and that's what quantum mechanics is also leaning to. But now what's interesting is, in the last 40 years, a lot of labs have replicated what George Sudarshan and Misra, who wrote this famous paper in the 1970s, showed, and you can actually control physical systems through observation alone. But this was already a part of Vedantic thought in India. And the question in philosophical circles that was asked was, if Rita or Rhythm, which is law, determines unfoldment of the universe, then where is the place for divinity, right? Where is the place for anybody? Then all that we have is Prakriti. Now, of course, in Sankhya, you have 24 tattvas for Prakriti, but you also have the 25th tattva, which is Purusha tattva, and Purusha means consciousness. So the answer to that was given that divinity, Shiva, or you can call Vishnu. Vishnu is the moral law which pervades the entire cosmos. And of course, there are two aspects of the same reality, of the same being, Vishnu and Shiva. And you can use any other terms that you want. That divinity creates or changes the universe through Drishti. And this is called Drishti Srishti Vada. That through Drishti, through the gaze, Srishti is made. And in fact, of course, in Vedanta, as you know, there is this whole conception of pralaya, of the universe going through various cycles. And in the pralaya stage, the sun increases, all the Prithvi tattva gets transformed into the Apa or Apas tattva, that gets transformed into the Tejas tattva, then into the Vayu tattva, then into the Akash tattva, and then into the very being of Shiva, or Chetana, let's say consciousness. And creation is the opposite thing. Now, as we all know, these all have correspondences, and these are described at length. What happens in Pralaya, it describes in length, for example, in the Mahabharata. And I've written on it, and I've actually quoted from the Mahabharata, the big passage, or from the Yoga Vasishta. And it perfectly corresponds to the imagined or speculated end of the solar system. In the solar system, after the energy of the sun is gone, the sun will become a giant, a red giant. It will become huge, many times bigger, and then it will take all the planets that there are and subsume them. They'll all be destroyed, and that liquidity, because these tattvas are not to be taken as water and earth. They are solidity, liquidity, fire or light, and then this wind. Now, I don't know, Pankaj, whether we're going to have questions. I've forgotten. I think you had probably told me, but I would want to perhaps, if there are questions, I'll be very happy to answer them. But I want to tie this up with another aspect of ancient Indian science, which sadly Indians don't know about, and they've left it, totally ignored it. And that is the very beginning of Indian physical sciences is contained in a darshan called Vashishika darshan by Kaṇāda, and it's dated variously to 500 or 600 BCE. Now, of course, there are people in the philosophy departments who have done Vashishika sutras, but without any insight of physics. So 2016, 7 years ago, I translated the Vashishika sutras in a book called Matter and Mind, and I do invite all of you to take a look. It's 99 rupees on Amazon.in on Kindle, and you can also buy a printed copy if you so want. It is published in Canada. So I translated Kaṇāda's sutras, and astonishing stuff. First of all, Kaṇāda gives a framework for science, which is absolutely astonishingly contemporary. First of all, it says that all that is there to physical reality should be reducible to properties of matter and their motions. What it says is dravya, guna, and karma. Guna are the characteristics, and padartha, dravya, guna, and karma. And then, as far as we are concerned, from our perspective of consciousness, there are three things. One is samanya, the other is vishesha. Samanya is which is universal properties, vishesha, which are specific to the perspective from where we are interacting with the physical world. And the third is samavaya. Samavaya is the interaction of the outer and the inner, the outer world and the inner, the universe of bodies and the psychological world, the world of awareness, or the cognitive world. So beautiful. It also has a place for, it speaks about consciousness as Atman, and it also speaks about the mind as Manas, because our theories are not made in consciousness. Consciousness is just the light. In Kashmir Shaivism, which is this amazing reformulation, if you will, of Vedanta, which took place in Kashmir about 1200 years ago, Shiva is also called Prakash, or light. And the materiality or matter or mind where this light falls is called Vimarsha. Our Chintan or our reflection is called Vimarsha. So you can talk of all these terms, of all this in terms in modern terms, where people who do not know the Sanskrit terminology are not burdened by it. Now, what Kaṇāda also does, he, apart from other things, he speaks of three laws of motion. He talks of three laws of motion, two of which are identical to Newton's laws of motion. Why don't people in India know it? As we know, Newton's laws of motion are that an object which is traveling or in a state of rest will continue to be in that state of rest or motion. And Kaṇāda has exactly the same, slightly different verbiage. And the third law of motion of Newton's is, to every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. And Kaṇāda's sutra is Karya Virodhi Karma. Karya means action, Virodhi is opposed by karma is reaction. Exactly the same verbiage. So the least we can do is to read up on it and be inspired by it. And also in Indian sciences are the seeds for the resolution of the greatest crisis, which is confronting modern science. And what is that crisis? This is the crisis of cosmology. Modern science, which includes gravitation theory of Newton or Einstein's. Einstein's, of course, is only a generalization, can explain only 0.5% of the cosmos. This will shock you. It's true. Modern science, gravitation theory cannot explain the motion of stars in the galaxies, because what happens if you look at gravitation, the planets which are further away move much more slowly than planets which are closer to the sun. As you know, Mercury's period is 83 days, Venus is 225 days, Earth is 365 days, right? So the periods become longer because the planets which are further away from the sun move more slowly. But in these galaxies, stars which are far away from the center of the galaxies are moving as fast. as those stars which are closer to the center. So it cannot be explained. And for this, physics is saying that they need to invoke 28% dark matter, for which there is not the slightest shred of evidence. Then 25 years ago, they discovered that the whole universe is not only expanding, it's expanding at an accelerating rate. And this acceleration started 4 billion years ago. And for this, they have had to postulate 68% of universe as dark energy. 68 plus 28 make it 96%. Another 3.5% is interstellar dust. That takes you to 99.5%. So physics can only explain 0.5% of the universe. Now, I say that if you bring in the observer, consciousness, just as consciousness created a revolution in science, not just quantum mechanics, even Einstein's relativity theory was to bring in the observer, and say that, well, the speed of light should be constant for all observers. So this has been the departure from earlier physics, on which, sadly, Indian polity is based on classical physics. Indian polity or politicians, they do not know about the place of the observer. You know, that is another of the tragedies that we have. So if this place for the observer, just as George Sudarshan in his contribution also made, if this is brought in much more centrally into modern science, perhaps some of the crises that are confronting modern science will go away. And I think that could be a revolutionary thing. And in fact, one of the things that Kaṇāda speaks of in his sutras is that Dik and Kal are also a product of the mind to a certain extent. And Dik, of course, means directionality, and Kala means time. And recently, a new theory to which I have myself contributed, I work in this field, is that perhaps space is not three-dimensional, and for some mathematical reasons, it's slightly less than three-dimensional. To wit, it is e-dimensional. And I'll not go further into it, but because that perhaps goes too far from the focus of my of this presentation. But let me just mention one small point, which is of relevance to our talk, which is that mathematics or mathematical logic has shown, and this is many decades, 4 or 5 decades ago, that ternary logic is superior to binary logic. Ternary logic meaning discussion in threes or analysis in threes rather than twos. And in fact, in the 1970s, there were even attempts to build computer circuits based on ternary logic, because they would have been faster and more efficient. But then by that time, the semiconductor technology had advanced to such an extent that to create ternary gates would have been much too prohibitively expensive. So it was not done. But, you know, we're also machines. And we know that the physical body is also a machine. And we know that medicine is a way of dealing with the well-being of this machine. And allopathy is based on binary logic. Allopathy is treating symptoms. Allopathy is Western medicine, treating symptoms. And as we know, it has limitations. It's not able to deal with chronic illnesses, such as chronic pain, arthritis, and many others, or stress associated issues. While Ayurveda is based on ternary logic. It speaks of 3 doshas. It also speaks of 3 gunas, which of course are a part of the general Indian way of looking at reality. In fact, the Vedas themselves are called Trayi Vidya. You know, Indian, even Sanskrit grammar is to see reality in threes. So it is quite possible that bringing in ternary logic into medicine in a systematic way, and also for Ayurveda to stand up and speak confidently in trying to explain why it works to the extent it works for chronic illnesses, is to say that, look, we are based on sound mathematical principles. Sadly, Ayurvedic Vaidyas don't know this. They should read up on mathematical logic. It's not nothing complicated, but they should read the history or story, the storyline that, look, here we are based, the reason why we want you to try this out. And then the proof of the pudding is in the tasting of it. The COVID pandemic, the fatality rate in countries which used only modern medicine is at least 10 times greater. You look at Europe and US and Canada and Mexico, the fatality rate is nearly 4,000 per million, while in countries which use traditional logic, and traditional logic does incorporate, not just symptoms, but longer history, which use traditional logic, like countries like India and Japan or Korea. We're not talking about China because nobody knows the Chinese statistics, or Thailand or Indonesia or Bangladesh. The fatality rate is 1/10 or even lower, or Africa. It's even lower than in Western countries. So this also opens up the space for further analysis. I believe I've done about 58 minutes. I don't remember whether I was supposed to speak only for 1 hour and then have questions and answers. But if we are having questions and answers, I'll be more than happy to amplify on any of these things and tell you of other very interesting stuff. This is such a fascinating story, Indian sciences, and it's one of the amazing, astonishing scandals, if you will, that in India we turned away from these sciences, and we have not told 3 or 4 generations as to what our dharohar is, what our own heritage is. So with this, I'll stop, but I'll be happy to amplify on any of this.
You could speak for one day, not 1 hour. I have to invite you more for maybe series of lectures. You really made me smile when you said 99.5% is all unknown to modern physics. That was amazing. Then the 3-dimension to E-dimension. I really wish you can give a full lecture on that. That's amazing. It just sounds so exciting, E-dimension. Then you connected ternary logic with 3 dosh. Oh my God, you made my day. I think we all, especially me, I learned something new after a long time. So thank you very much for this exciting talk, and I wish we can have you more. Let's go to some questions, sir, with your permission. And what I'll do is I'll just enable, I think there is a way to enable so they can ask their question directly.
But before we have the question, since you did mention E-dimensionality, I will very, very quickly talk about it. I made this discovery 3 years ago. I've written a whole series of papers in Nature Scientific Reports, and it solves one of the central crises of cosmology, which is why the rate of expansion of the universe is different from 2 different ways of looking at the universe, which is called Hubble tension. If you look at the universe from E-dimensionality, then that problem goes away. If you just Google our E-dimensional universe, I've written a popular article for Medium. You'll get all the links to scientific peer-reviewed journal articles on this, and a lot of other new stuff that is being published.
Awesome. So I think everybody can now just unmute themselves. They can switch on their camera and then can ask their question directly instead of me reading their questions, I think. If that works for everybody, please. Professor Anup Kumar, maybe you can go first. Yeah, or whoever. Or Professor Amod Sani, my colleague at Flame. Yes, please go ahead.
This is Amod. Something, my camera is not switching on. But, okay. Yeah, just I had typed the question there earlier. The thing is that regarding the Schrodinger and QM connection, I certainly agree that worldviews can inspire people to think differently and thereby come up with better equations and so on. But do we have a direct trail like there is in the Mendeleev case where he pretty much names the elements in honor of Pāṇini, that kind of thing? Is there a trail?
Of course, yeah. Mendeleev's periodic table, chemistry. As we all know, he was interested in Sanskrit, and I've written on that as well. And he predicted unknown chemicals, which he didn't call them after Pāṇini. He called them Pratham and Dutiya, etc.
Yeah, Eka boron, Dvitiya boron.
Yeah. Well, we have Schrodinger's own evidence. Schrodinger himself, in his autobiography, mentions that this central idea came to him from the Upanishads. And as I stress, we are not saying that this means that quantum mechanics came from Upanishads. We've got to circumspect. But it's certainly true that the way quantum mechanics has evolved, it is consistent with Vedanta. And therefore, this itself, and George Sudarshan himself was a Vedantin. In fact, I used to meet him at the annual Vedanta congresses in Ohio. And he used to speak about Vedanta. I used to speak about Vedanta as well. So what we need to do, people in India forget, and this is how sometimes I get very disillusioned or disappointed that we've connected to sciences in such a mechanical way. Sciences from the West, you look at the greatest Western scientists, they are open, they're looking around, they're looking into philosophy of their own tradition, which is what they should. Or they also go to Indian philosophy or Indian darshan, like not just Schrodinger. You also look at Heisenberg, who's the other creator of quantum mechanics. He also said that, or von Neumann, or many, many others, or the greatest mathematicians. Why aren't we in India, why are we doing science mechanically, only looking at it combinatorically? Here is an equation. Now, I have my students, I'm going to ask them, can you program this? And can you tweak this formula? That's not primary science. And in order to do modern science, you don't do it through equations, you do it through intuition. Intuition is primary. Intuition tells you this is where you have to go, right? And until India does that, and India needs to do that. Why? India's economy is the third largest right now, but according to all economists, or at least let's say many economists, India's GDP will overtake both US and China's in the next 20 years, America's in the next 10, 12 years, and China's in the next 25 years. And for India to do that, we also need to have more self-confidence, right? Self-confidence in the sciences, not being parochial. We're not talking of it as in a parochial sense, because this is universal knowledge. Everything is universal knowledge. But if you speak about it confidently, then people, first of all, our own new generations, but also people from all over the world will be able to relate to it. And that's how science
the problem, as I see it, is that it's difficult to distinguish sober-headed commentators from the everything was invented 10,000 years ago crowd, because it's just such a headache that it's difficult to defend yourself from the nonsense.
But I sort of I would challenge you on this in the following way. You have crazy people in every culture and society.
Yeah.
What you need are people who are gatekeepers. Where are Indian gatekeepers? Where are Indian scientists who are writing reviews of their understanding of science? We are leaving it to journalists or people who don't have knowledge. They are going to say things which can be totally crazy. So I hold people like you responsible.
Okay.
Professors
that's fair.
Have to do it. It's their responsibility to curate this information. Right? Yeah. Everything is, it's like the internet. In internet, you have all kinds of stuff, but you need curated information. And that's where professors have to come in, and they have to study. If they don't know, they haven't shown the inclination to get out and look at these texts on their own and challenge it and say that, okay, this is maybe interesting in some sense, but not useful. And that is a perfectly legitimate thing to say as well.
Right. I can take this, the way people ask the question. So second person I think to ask question was Ajay Sharma. So Professor Ajay Sharma can go next.
Yeah, namaskar, Dr. Sanjay. Actually, I'm extremely thankful to Professor Jain for at least inviting Professor Subhash Kak and allowing us to interact with him. Certainly, I have started one group, Ancient Indian Physics, and collected around 150 books around science. Basically, there are very few books are on physics, very few. One is from Ajay, from USA only, and from India, Dr. N.G. Dogre, some more persons has already worked over there. But while we are now passing through a phase where we are going to implement this National Education Policy 2020, in that we intend to put these contents in syllabus courses for different classes. It is now it has become very difficult now. What part, how to put, because very rare persons understand physics and Sanskrit both simultaneously. So what may be the procedure which we can use to put them in syllabus so that people can feel that yes, we were doing this thing. Okay, new thing is this one. Next, please give us some solutions, some directions so that we can implement certain things.
Okay, well, there's some good stuff already happening. Professor Mahadevan, he from Bengaluru, he has written a book called The Indian Knowledge Systems, published by Prentice Hall, India. I have it somewhere here. Very nice book, 500-600 pages. And I think this will be a part of a course which will be, or recommended book, or maybe as a fundamental book for all science or engineering students across the country. It's a good thing. It's a good book. It doesn't touch into everything. Now, of course, we also don't want to burden everybody with all this information. You know, let's be pragmatic. Everybody doesn't have to know all this stuff. All that, maybe books don't have to be revised very drastically. If you just put in a couple of lines that, look, Kaṇāda did this, and not even push it too much, because then it's up to people to explore it. Not everybody has to be a historian or scientist and so on. But I think what is, of course, central to all of this is where modern contemporary West is missing, is that even though the greatest Western scientists, and I know many of them personally, recognize that consciousness cannot be derived from the body, materiality. So these are two complementary aspects. But the average person and the policymaker in Washington, they are driven by the idea that this whole machine, this world machine, is a mechanical machine. And that's where many of the problems related to, you know, countries or societies, etc., arise. So this is the central thing. If we can push this, and you don't even have to push it, it's already in books such as the Bhagavad Gita. What is the Bhagavad Gita all about? It's that there is this Atman, right? There's this Atman and there is this body, the Sharir, and so on. So we don't have to do too much. Basically, if in all the textbooks that we have, we had just a paragraph or so in the beginning, giving a very sober summary, not even making any big claims, and giving some recommended reading, that would be plenty. All this could be done. All the NCERT books could be reformed in probably just a month of hard look at them. And everything else is fine, because we're not saying that Western knowledge is not universal knowledge. All the knowledge that is now a part of education is fine. It's universal knowledge. We accept all of this. So we don't have to do all of that. But now for historians who want to study history, they have to be very, once again, sober. For example, now there are claims that Bharadwaj's Vimana Shastra already had planes. Now that's certainly not true, because scientists, scholars have looked at Vimana Shastra, and they claim that this was probably written up in the 1890s. Somebody made it up. And all that about that Talapades, you know, that whole stuff has got to be looked at with a great pinch of salt. So we've got to be very skeptical, hard-nosed, looking at all the stuff. But it's also true that the greatest genius who ever was a king, we admitted, at least I, to my satisfaction, that Pāṇini was the greatest genius who ever lived. But the greatest scholar king of all time is Bhoj Paramar from Madhya Pradesh, who was the king about 1,000 years ago. He wrote 84 books. I have an essay on that where the books are also listed, including books on mechanical toys, on planes, and they look like gliders which could fly. And it's all sensible. You can actually look at what he's written, and these are texts which are ancient texts. So what we need to do is to be very critically examine claims. And what I think Dr. Amit Kumar mentioned, you cannot let people say anything. But of course, it's true that in poetic imagination, Vimans were a part of that story. Ramayana story, you have everybody comes back in a Viman, that's poetic imagination. Or in Mahabharata, there is that Saubha Parva, where you have these people in airtight suits, in airships, fighting people. So this is amazing. But this also leads to this whole question of what is consciousness? How could the rishis imagine things which were to happen in the future, right? So what is to imagination? What is to consciousness? If consciousness is indeed outside of space-time, it opens up the whole can of worms, philosophy, this and that makes a lot of the stuff in the Indian tradition accessible and relevant.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Thank you. I think we'll go to the next question by Pragya Karn, if she can unmute herself.
Yes, sir. Good evening from India. Professor Subhash, it's very fascinating to hear about ancient Indian sciences. And as a youngster, I am also, since I am hearing it now more that our science was developed, and you rightly said that we don't have to overburden the youngsters, that we have invented so many things and all. It has to slowly inculcated in the younger generation that they should first accept, because suddenly it is coming out that, okay, it was discovered long back in the Vedic eras. So my question is, sir, what was the basis of this ancient science development? And whether they were performing experiments or, some observations they were seeing in the nature. What was the idea?
Sure, good question. You have 6 darshanas, right? You have Nyaya, Vashishika, Sankhya, Yoga, Purva Mimamsa, Uttar Mimamsa. It's all based on Nyaya, on logic, on Tarka, on observation. If you read about Charaka Samhita or Sushruta Samhita, the Vadya was expected to go out and test out the Aushadhis, right? And see what the effect was. All on observation, all on use of common sense, of critical method, right? And I think that is the takeaway. The takeaway is to use the critical method, both to look at the present, which sadly the wokists in Wokistan that America has become, people have stopped using the critical method because what they say, the whole idea of wokism is that we are nothing but bodies. If we are nothing but bodies, therefore everybody should be the same, like robots. Every robot should have the same performance, and then all the sloppy thinking that ensues from there. So what Indian system was based was on logic and experimentation, as it should be, and it should give people faith. Past is only a story, but the significance of past is that it should give you the strength to confront the present in all its complexity, so that you are able to deal with the problems in a humane and compassionate manner, so that because all human beings are the same. So that's the big takeaway.
Okay, the next question, I'll invite Dr. Pillai. Please unmute yourself and ask the question. Dr. Pillai.
Good morning, good evening, whatever it is now.
So Sanskrit has been the root language, for many of the Romance languages. I'm just wondering then why, some of the Indian scientific ideas at that time, when the diffusion of the language, happened to Romantic European countries, why didn't some of the scientific ideas also diffuse along with the languages? Well, the question of language is a contested one, it's a complicated one, probably beyond the scope of this talk, because as you know, we have this whole idea of Indo-European languages as a family. Now, as to where the original central region of the Indo-European languages, say 5,000 years ago was, there are many theories, perhaps, not the time to get into that. So let's not even talk about whether it diffused from one place or the other, but certainly we take what we want to take. It's like education. You can never teach something to someone unless that person is ready to actually be at that spot, right? You can only give suggestions. Education is all giving suggestions, pushing or prodding. The whole idea of dhvani, brilliant idea, that you can, the resonance you can teach indirectly through analogy, perhaps, right? So let's also not downplay the native wisdom in other civilizations and cultures. Now, what I think was central to India was this codification in the darshanas, for example. You have the Vashishika sutras, you have the codification, which is not to say that people in some other culture, maybe in South America, in the Inca world, or the Mayans, or in Europe, the Druids, or in Spain, they also did not have the same intuition. Maybe they also had the same intuition. Most people are very wise. Most people intuitively know so much more than most people imagine. In fact, I can tell you a personal story. As I was 23, I thought I was very smart. I had done my PhD. So I went to Srinagar during the summers. As you know, I'm from Kashmir. And so I wanted to tell people about what I knew. So my cousins, my young cousins, used to take me to their friends, and I would talk to, and I had many occasions to talk to their grandmothers. And I realized, talking to them, that they knew so much. One doesn't have to know English or even Hindi in Kashmiri setting. They probably only knew Kashmiri or whatever language one might have, that people intuitively know a lot. But what was the Indian miracle, if you will, was the codification of all of this in the sutras. And that codification was something, how does one connect to something else? That here is something which one can read and then reinforce one's own intuition that, oh yeah, it does hang together. That's the whole process of education and knowledge unfoldment.
Okay, thank you. I'll go next to Dr. Amba Kulkarni. You can ask a question. Please unmute yourself.
Well, I don't have a question. Actually, I just wanted to thank Professor Subhash Kak for a wonderful lecture where he has covered a wide gamut of India's contribution to sciences and how the Western scientists were influenced by Indian knowledge system. So thank you very much.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
there was another question by Professor Anup Kumar. I think he is not here anymore, but I can still read his question. I agree that in terms of thought, ideas, Sanskrit knowledge systems, that is ancient sciences, ask profound questions that attempted to explain physical reality with quite similar classical laws and quantum uncertainty and superimposition. However, why, in your view, this did not evolve into what we today study as physics and technology? What is the factor that was missing? This is by Professor Anup Kumar in Cleveland.
Excellent question. And it's a question which deserves a substantial answer. Well, you could ask, why did this miracle occur in Europe, right? This flowering, of course, you had infinite series in Kerala, for example? Well, two big things. First of all, let me speak of India. Indian universities were destroyed around 1000, 1000, 1200, Nalanda, Vikramshila, and others. All those universities are destroyed. So the formal, large-scale education framework was destroyed. But research still took place. For example, it took place in families. The great Kerala School of Mathematics, this was families. Within families, people carried on. So this is one side to it, that destruction of universities. Second side to it is the discovery of the New World. So much of wealth came in, gold from the New World came to Europe, and the demand arose for creation of new timekeeping devices. And so these church schools or seminaries, etc., they received funds. Hey, can you do this or can you do that? And that started a process. Ultimately, physical or systems or social organizations have a logic of their own. So the modern, it wasn't modern at that time, or Cambridge, or Oxford, they were still church institutions. Or before that, in Europe, in Portugal, and other places, there were these institutions. So a process started, or Italy, we should not downplay Italy and Germany and so on. A process started which took a life of its own, and which was wonderful, and people started questioning each other. And so long as that questioning was only maintained in a family setting, as in the Kerala school, it had to be very limited. You need more and more questioning, which is why I'm inviting you, please challenge my book, Matter and Mind, and other stuff. It's all out there. I've written on many, many different aspects. And in fact, the stuff emanating out of e-dimensionality could be of great significance as well. And in my view, it is actually related to the Indian tradition, because as a person who is aware of many of these texts, you are inspired. I would have been afraid like everybody else. Nobody, not Newton or Einstein, challenged this notion that space is three-dimensional because of the influence or the prestige of Descartes, right? Descartes, 4 or 5 centuries ago, said space is three-dimensional. But when I read Kaṇāda, and Kaṇāda says, well, these are notions of the mind, and these are only conventions. That gave me the courage to take the mathematical theorem about optimality of e-dimensionality and apply it to cosmology and apply it to the structure of the DNA. I have papers coming out on that also, and apply it to black hole physics and so on. And I'll be happy to share all these papers with you guys. And we don't know where this will all go, because science is a conversation. And you say something and it could be wrong. But you have to have the courage to stand up if your intuition tells you that this is so. And this is because ultimately what we should all be attached to is truth. Truth in our own being and truth in society.
Okay, great. So Professor Anup Kumar is still here. Anup, you want to ask something more? I read your question already. Yeah. Okay. I think there is a follow-up question by my colleague at Flame University, Professor Anup, Amod Sane. Amod, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you are aware of any mechanisms similar to Antikythera, which seems to be a planetary gear type system somewhere in Greece long ago.
Yes, I know about it. What are the mechanisms within India? Well, I think, it's so sad. Bhoj Paramars, Bhoj Dev's books, because he wrote on all of this, astronomy, all of this. Why aren't people doing it? It makes me so sad. Why?
No, but are translations available? Bhoj Paramars?
Of course, there are translations available. There's some good stuff people have done in isolation in Madhya Pradesh and elsewhere. But much further work needs to be done. And you also have the great Bhojshala. You even have some wonderful stuff done by, if I am not mistaken, an English scholar, because when these big buildings were constructed, they also made models, diagrams, which are inscribed or carved on a wall. It also tells you how the construction was done. You just look at Ellora. How was the entire mountain carved so that each image is a part of that rock? Has anybody thought about it? Why aren't people asking these questions? These are questions to be asked. How was this done? And this is not for chest thumping. These are logical questions. Anybody should be inspired by this, right? For example, I went to Cusco in Peru, and the way they conceived of the city itself in the image of an animal, it gives you the idea of the thought process. After all, what we all should be interested in, living in this global village, of how does the mind work? That is the last frontier of science. Consciousness is one. Consciousness, in my view and my understanding, if we take the Vedantic view, is transcendent. But mind has a structure. Mind has an organization. So how does the mind work? And how does mind see things? Because that will also help us not only understand current problems. Remember, last year alone, 120,000 Americans died of drug overdose. These are 120,000 young people in apparent good health with families, good-looking people with children. Why are they taking drugs? Why are they unhappy? Because this whole view, this Vokistan view that you are nothing but the body, cannot give you happiness. And that is the view that Indians are also adopting, because the power of Hollywood is so huge. Hollywood is copied by Bollywood, because Bollywood is a great the mimicry machine,
it's basically a mimicry machine. They copy everything, fonts,
everything.
posters,
So,
music.
And then they spread it out to different corners of India. So can we stand up and create aesthetically a powerful way of communicating this wisdom and this science, which can empower all of us, everybody, every human being in all corners of the world?
Yes. Anup, sorry, you want to ask any follow-up question? I already read your question, Anup.
Yeah. Thank you. For some reason, I got unmuted. I got muted, and so I couldn't really. And then
something happened.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Kak, for this excellent talk. My question has already been asked by Pankaj, so you have already answered it. I just wanted to say that, yes, there is this, what you touched upon, which is the rupture in the continuity of the educational institutions. That was a major factor in these ideas not flowering into mechanistic explanations, eventually technological applications, and those kinds of things that you see in Europe. So I was thinking in terms of this, that what you were talking about, often we go back and look at ancient ideas and start asking, hey, where is no, they didn't have this, or they really had a plane, or they really had this. That's not really the question to be asked. The question is that they speculated, they had ideas, and through ideas, you connect with those ideas and you develop new ideas. And that's what European colonialists did. They saw the ideas here, they took it there, they developed new ideas by connecting with those ideas, building on those ideas. And so there is something about our educational system where we need to connect the present generation to those ideas. It's more about the ideational level that that connection and that continuity needs to be restored.
Absolutely. And it can be done quite quickly. As I mentioned before, you don't have to wholesale change books. Math is the same, whether you're going back to Brahmagupta or Bhaskaracharya or you write it in modern notation, that's all fine. You just probably need to add some introductory material here and there, so that people, those who are interested, because most people are not interested, which is perfectly fine, those who are interested can get connected to curated sources of information or reliable sources of information for themselves, because each person must ultimately find their own truth. And for finding their own truth, they must go through this process of manthan, right? Of that tapas, of that suffering. And you cannot do that if you don't know where to find, reliable information. You can go off in all wrong tangents. So for the present, I totally agree with you, Anup, that what we need to do is to use this more to inspire us to think outside of the box, because sometimes outside of the box thinking helps you find solutions to pressing current day problems that being stuck in old ways of thinking will not lead you to.
Can I just put up, Pankaj, can I ask a follow-up question? I don't want to lose this opportunity because I have read Professor Kak's work on consciousness a lot. And so I just wanted to ask him about, and he's a computer scientist as well. So what is your take on integrated information theory as an explanatory model for consciousness?
No, totally. I think it's nonsense. It's totally nonsense. Total nonsense. Yeah, it doesn't go anywhere at all. And I've said this at places. Even talked to Christoph Koch and so on. It's nonsense. You can't. No, this is Brahma Sutras. No, you cannot have consciousness. You can't have Atman from the body. You cannot have conscious from space-time machine. And consciousness is the complementary side. As a quantum theorist also, yes, these are two different sides of reality. So that's a dead end. And there are lots of these dead ends that people get stuck to.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Anup. That was Professor Anup Kumar from Cleveland State University. All right, in Ohio. I think we'll go to the last question now. That is by an anonymous user, and I don't know his name or her name. But the question is about Raja Bhoj or Bhoj Raj. I think the one who created Jantar Mantar in Ujjain and so on, right?
Not Jantar Mantar, not Jantar
Mantar. Sorry, okay.
That is Jai Singh.
Yes. Oh, Raja Jai Singh. Yes. So, yes. So you want to ask a question directly, or but you're asking something that maybe some other people wrote things and then they got attributed to Bhoj? Is that?
Well, okay, good. That's a reasonable question. As a scholar, you must always ask those questions, right? And it is possible, but we don't know. It's also possible that he himself did it. I have an essay on it. All these things don't come back to my mind. If you go to Medium, I have an essay on it, on Bhoj. But I am quite sure that those texts, now it's quite possible that some of those texts were not by him. It's also possible that the speeches which are attributed to Ronald Reagan and George Bush were not written by them, and they are actually not written by them. All these speeches which are written, these books, speeches by such and such person are not written by them. Or if you look at Alexander Dumas' novels, The Count of Monte Cristo, he had 30 writers writing for him. He had a machine. So he would tell them, now write this or write that. So authorship is a very complicated process if you really come down to it. And even, grammar, etc. Even somebody as good as V.S. Naipaul, who won the Nobel Prize, as you know, once he would write his book, he would send the text to a scholar of the English language, and he would pay him, I don't know, $10 a page or some sufficient amount of money to go through the language to correct it of any possible grammatical flaws, So all those things do happen. But it's an interesting question.
Yes.
Did Raja Bhoj himself write all those 84 books? I don't know, but it's possible he may have. But the least that one can do is to investigate this question, to present it to scholar. He is such a genius. Why isn't he known more broadly in India? for his architecture, for so many of the contributions that he made.
Yes.
And as a great king, Raja Bhoj and who was that Chola, Rajendra Chola, controlled most of India, and they had an alliance. Taken together, they controlled most of India. Why don't Indian students know about it? Okay, you don't know physics, math, etc. It's complicated and boring. History is interesting. This is an interesting story. Why don't NCERT books talk about that?
Yeah, that's really, really important. Super. It took your more than 1.5 hours, but I think we can go for hours and hours. But looking at your early morning, probably your time is really precious, and love to have you again, and for such exciting conversations and talks. Thank you so much from all of us, and have a great day and great time back in Oklahoma there. Thank you, sir, and thank you all.
Thank you, Pankaj. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Good, excellent questions.
Yes.
Too. And thank you, Pankaj.
Thank you. Thank you from Flame University. Thank you, and bye, everybody.